how is it being a head of credit at the moment? How are you approaching this situation?
Well, it's you have to make the best of it, I think, is the short answer. And I think we've been fortunate that our technology is in pretty good shape at work. So almost without exception, we've been able to have all of our existing meetings without any major disruption. I think that type of thing has been so key to maintain an element of structure to your day and to try and keep teams as connected as possible. It's never going to be the same as if it was person to person, but you need to try and make it as much like that as possible. But it's not easy, and I think what I've tried to instill across the team is that when things are not easy and when the markets are behaving like they are, there are risks of things like blame culture coming in, or people are operating at a higher level of pressure than normal, and it's really important, I think, to just try as much as possible to take a step back and appreciate the difficult circumstances that we're all in, and that it's not easy for anybody. To try and keep dialogue as positive and constructive as possible.
Yeah, and when you sort of talk about sort of markets being as they are, the behaviour of markets, how much of that do you think is an efficient or becoming an efficient way of responding to this crisis, and how much is just pure dislocation?
Well, we'll see, because we don't know at this point on the fundamental side just how long or bad things are going to be, and the range of outcomes here is still very, very broad. But I do think at the same time there is a huge amount of dislocation now, particularly in my area of fixed income and credit, where because of the velocity of the move in such a short period of time, at a time where around the world people are trying to work from home, the liquidity of the market has not been able to keep pace with the move. And so therefore some of the rational behavior that you would normally expect from investors has just not been possible, because the market has not been able to be functioning that way. And so that's involved quite a lot of thinking on your feet and reacting quickly to the evolving circumstances. And obviously, to some extent, I think you have to say thanks very much to the extent of fiscal and monetary stimulus, which has already started to arrive in spades, because were it not for that quick response, I do think that things could be considerably worse than they are as it stands today.
Yeah, there aren't many investment professionals who've had to be good at reading fiscal policy, because fiscal policy has been largely absent or hasn't really been required for a lot of the last 20 years or so. It feels like, anyhow. How is that something that you are starting to build into your team's thinking and adapt into your own investment sort of practice? The
line between fiscal and monetary is kind of blurred here, but you're right. I think it's more, what we're trying to do as much as possible is read into it the broader intentions. To me, when I look at some of the measures that are being put in place, the commonalities is around trying to suppress unemployment rates globally as much as possible, because people obviously know that it's a lot more difficult to get people back into work where they have lost their job, rather than if you were able to somehow bridge that gap. And I think the implication for us, therefore, is that bigger employers are likely to benefit more from this type of activity. And we're looking at that sort of differentiation between big and small starting to come through. The other thing clearly is that there's an effort here to try and calm the credit markets first and foremost, because again, they appreciate that it's vital to the functioning of the markets and vital to the functioning of banks as a lender to the real economy. And so when we think about things like direct buying of US investment grade, for example, by the Fed, and even via ETFs, direct buying, I mean, this is quite unprecedented stuff. It's clearly intended to keep things functioning, whereas there's also been a lot of calls to cancel dividends, or pause dividends and pause or ban share buyback programs if you are going to take state aid. To me, again, this is a bit of a separation between the type of stimulus and support which is designed to keep things going versus designed to prop up equity multiples. And maybe unlike the past, you're not seeing quite as much of the latter, but you're certainly seeing a whole lot of the former. I think when you add it up together, a recent commentator was saying that it's now more than the GDP of Japan has just been thrown at the market in terms of stimulus. Now, clearly, that gives you some indication of the amount of uncertainty on the demand side. That's the sort of levels that are likely to be required just to keep things bridged between now and the future.
This isn't the sort of scenario that you can teach people about very much. What sort of training or how is your charter playing a role at this time? I'm not sure we've got part of the CFA program that sort of necessarily deals with this kind of scenario.
No, absolutely not. Some of the behavioral psychology around being wedded to existing positions or holding on to losers and that sort of thing, I think are absolutely important to recognize here. Clearly there is a huge amount of dislocation here, but ultimately there will be survivors, and the survivors are likely in the medium to long term to be in a stronger position in terms of their competitive landscape than they were coming into this. But that's probably going to involve making some decisions based on assumptions which were miles away from the type of assumptions that you might have had just a few weeks ago. That's something that we're trying to encourage across the team.
So I suppose we could say that security selection within markets is becoming sort of more maybe of a factor than it has been for a little while.
Absolutely, and also just what constitutes risk, because I think again we talked about dislocation and illiquidity. There's a large part of the market which is effectively frozen at this point and will unfreeze not overnight. It'll unfreeze through the course of this crisis, and I think what you'll find is that maybe volatility has not been a particularly good measure of risk in some instances where things have been loosely marked at X, but in fact really should be at Y. Whereas conversely, I think what you found certainly in my market over the last few weeks is that because of the lack of functioning markets, people have been selling what they can rather than what they should, which means that a lot of higher quality things are actually meaningfully more depressed in terms of what it looks like it's done over the last few weeks than what maybe it will do in reality over the next few months.